Welcome to the Impact Disciple Making Podcast. I'm Mike Keaton, your host, and we are glad that you have joined us today. I am again joined with Ken Adams, great disciple maker and leader of a disciple making movement at Crossroads Church as the lead pastor, as well as the founder of Impact Ministries. And we've been having conversations, Ken, about making disciples, and specifically conversations here lately about something that I like to talk about, and that's strategy. Mm-hmm. And so we've talked a lot about all the different pieces of strategy, and today's strategy is going to be a good one because it's kind of what the end result is and really what we're trying to achieve. You know? So it's a good step. But give us a quick review, if you will, kind of where we've been and lead us up to where we are today.
Yeah, so here's what's got to happen. If you're going to be a disciple-making church, a couple things have to be in place. First of all, you have to have a clearly defined target. You got to know what you're aiming for. Jesus makes that pretty clear. He says, make disciples. He goes on to say, make fully trained disciples. So we're clearly not making decisions. We're making disciples. Secondly, you got to have a strategy to help accomplish that. It doesn't happen automatically, man. You don't open up the doors and have fully trained disciples. You got to be intentional. You create environments, just like Jesus did, in order to help execute that strategy. And then the last part is you develop leaders to do that. And so that strategy component is one part of that whole big picture, and that involves really 5 things. First, we reach out. We invite people to come and see. A second step is that we lift up Jesus Christ so that people will know who God is and exalt the Father. And then third step is that we help people get plugged in and take a next step, get connected to the body of Christ and come to know Christ. And then after that, we start to build them up. We help them to grow. We help them to learn what it means to really live like Jesus and lead like Jesus. And then the last thing we do is then we send people out. Mm-hmm. We send out workers into the harvest. And so that really is the full picture of the strategy that Jesus used to help untrained people become fully trained disciples.
So exactly, and so that's what we want to talk about today, is that last part there. And I remember years ago hearing a phrase being kind of passed around out here in church world that church really should not necessarily be measured by how many people it's bringing in, but by how many people it's sending out. And so when we think about that in terms of what we've been talking about, I mean, what would you say to that, Ken?
You know, interesting statement that people made, and it always reminds me of just something that I've observed from our own denomination that we're part of for years. You know, isn't it interesting that every single year we get 2 different reports that take up a large part of our denominational newspaper. One is the number of baptisms that churches have, and the next one is the amount of giving to the denomination. Now, isn't it interesting that the 2 things that we measure are not really the very thing that Jesus would measure, and that is that we are sending out disciple makers to make more disciples. And so I think that says a lot about what we value and what we measure. And Mike, I'm not so sure that we're measuring the very things that Jesus would measure or would want us to measure. And so my first thought is that if we're not sending out workers into the harvest, we're not actually accomplishing the mission that we've been called. So we certainly want to reach people, and we certainly want to teach people, but if we just reach and teach and we don't send people to reach more people, then the mission isn't going to become a movement, and we're not going to see disciples made of all nations. It's not going to happen. So we got to make sure we get this last part right.
That's right. And really it is from the beginning the plan of Jesus.
Yeah.
So what we've been talking throughout these episodes about following our model of Christ. And you know, when he appeared to his disciples, there after the resurrection.
Yep.
What did he say?
Yeah, he said go.
Yeah.
He said go. You know, there's a very successful disciple-making organization worldwide. It's a big organization, and for years, I'm not sure if they still follow this, but for years, their strategy was 3 simple words: win, build, sin. Win, build, sin. And so, you know, that's a great way to remember what our strategy is. We win people to Christ, we build people up as disciples, and then we send them out to win more people for Christ. And so when Jesus came and he called the 12 and he poured into those guys, he did so for a reason, and that was so that he would send them to reach more people. You know, Jesus said this at the end of John, right before he leaves here. And he says, peace be with you. Just as the Father has sent me, so I send you. John chapter 20, verse 21. Just as the Father has sent me, so I what? Send you.
Right.
So, you know, you can't look at the life of Christ and not realize that being sent out is a part of the strategy of making disciples. It's so clearly there. You just can't miss it.
That's good. It's interesting, you know, to look back at his beginning of his ministry. He said, come and see.
Yeah.
Come.
Yeah.
And then the very last thing he says, actually right before he ascended,
Yeah.
all right, now go be my witness.
Yeah.
And so it was his plan from the beginning
Absolutely.
to do that. And I love that simplicity of win, build, send.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So how do you think churches are doing, Ken?
Wow. Well, I know from our own context, it's a serious challenge, right? And we get people started in the process. We get the baton passed, but sometimes we drop it before we get to the end of the race, right? And so, big challenge to get people to make that whole process from untrained to fully trained. I know a lot of people who go through discipleship groups, fill out lots of curriculum, fill in the blanks, get lots of group meetings under their belt. And then they take that book and they put it on the shelf, and they never take the next step. They never go out and make another disciple. So I don't know how well we're doing at accomplishing that last step of sending out. You know, if you go back, you look at the Gospels, Jesus did some things and prepared his disciples so that he knew they were going to accomplish the mission before he left. In fact, if you go back and read in the book of Luke in chapter 9, Jesus sent out the 12, and then in chapter 10, he sent out the 72. And interesting that when they come back after having gone out, they report to Jesus on what had happened, and the Bible says that Jesus was full of joy.
Right.
The reason he was full of joy is because he knew they got it, man. He knew that they were going to go out and they were going to do what he had done. So he could now say with confidence, just as the Father has sent me, so I'm sending you. He knew they were going to do it, man.
Right.
So.
And it makes him happy. It makes him excited. That's what excited him. And if that excites him, it should excite us.
Oh, man.
And so we should really go after that. So, Ken, could you speak just to maybe give us a couple of thoughts on, well, how do we go about that? How do you actually send someone out?
So I think there's a couple things. First of all is that you do what Jesus did, and you select the right individuals, right? And so you select people that are hungry and that have a desire for more. You cast clear vision to those people of what, from the very beginning, Jesus said, follow me, I'll make you a fisher of men.
Right,
so
that's
they
good.
might not have fully understood it at the time, but Jesus was painting the picture from the very beginning that this was about more than just what they would get out of it. Secondly, is that then you select the right people, and then you equip them, you prepare them, you make the investment, and you pour into them. A lot of times we don't do a good enough job of equipping people to be disciple makers. We don't necessarily know that they are that they're ready, and we do that. Think of it like this: if we're gonna raise up a teacher, we don't just look for somebody who can read. We look for somebody who's gotten a bachelor's degree. We look for somebody who's gone through a student teaching approach. We look for somebody who's gotten certified. And we have steps before we turn somebody loose in a classroom.
Sure.
We even do the same thing when somebody learns to drive a car. We make sure they go through a written exam, we go through a class, then they have some apprentice driving, and then eventually have to take a test. I mean, think about all the ways that we prepare people to do things, and then you look at the church and we're just falling way too short of preparing people. So select the right people, prepare those people, and then the last thing we do is we need to mobilize them, and we need to give them a clear and compelling call to go and make disciples. Sometimes we just have a failure to launch, right?
That's exactly the word I was just thinking. They got to launch. Somebody's got to launch.
That's exactly right.
Right. I mean, it's the goal of every parent to launch their child out of their house, right?
Yeah.
Why would it not be the church, same as the church, right? We'll launch them out.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Multiplying movement.
Yeah,
it's good.
So the strategy is clear, man. We've got a strategy that works if we'll work the strategy.
Right. So, and that is to reach out, lift up, plug in, build up, and send out.
It'll work.
That's it.
It's good stuff, Mike.
Thank you guys for joining us for this episode of the Disciple Making Podcast. Hope you've caught all those. If you haven't, please go back and listen to some of those and watch some of those others so you can get the full strategy. And if you let us know that you watched today, then we'll also include with your letting us know that a free resource for you from our Impact Resource Library. Ken's written an incredible volume of resources to help a multiplying movement take place, not just here in our context, but also in your life and ministry as well. And so this one's called Thinking Like Jesus Thought. And if you're going to lead a movement of multiplying, then you obviously got to have the heart and mind of Christ. So I want to encourage you with that. And thank you guys again for being with us today. God bless y'all and y'all's disciple making efforts.